Hello there. Today I thought I'd revisit wines of Bodegas Casa Castillo because having tried their garnacha and found that was really very good, I thought it would be quite interesting to have a look at a wine made from the Monastrell grape variety, which is what they're most famous for. The estate was purchased in 1941 by the current owner, José Maria Vicente's grandfather. So 3 generations of the family have now been involved in managing it. It was originally set up in the 1870s by a French viticulturist who had come from France, where his vineyards had been decimated by Phylloxera. He set up the estate here. In 1985, Phylloxera caught up with the vineyards of Jumilla, which saw José Maria's father having to replant the majority of their vines. They do have a small plot of ungrafted Monastrell from 1941. But the vines on the majority of the estate date from these plantings in 1985. Post-Phylloxera, the family released their first wine in 1991. The estate is now somewhere in the region of 174 hectares. It's run entirely organically and they're certified for that. Jumilla as a region is really sun-baked. On average, they'll have 300 days of sunshine a year. This sunshine is balanced by the cooling influence of altitude. The region lies at between 800 and 400 metres above sea level, and where it is in southwest Spain, there is a certain amount of cooling influence coming from the Mediterranean. We're sort of just inland from Murcia or Alicante here. This particular wine makes up about half the property's production. It comes from a vineyard called El Valle. Unsurprisingly, it's a vineyard on a valley floor. And I've seen lots of different references as to what the soil types are here. Some have said sandy, some have said stony, some have said alluvial, and others have talked about crusty brown limestone. I'm guessing that all of those are probably reasonably true. The area generally has limestone subsoils, so I'd expect to see some of that there. In a valley, you'd expect to see some sort of alluvial deposit. Now, whether that is as clays or whether that is as sand, I'm not entirely sure. But you probably have a richer alluvial soil over a limestone subsoil. And the limestone should prove a good water reservoir to provide the wine with water throughout the growing season in a region that has quite low rainfall. So here are the vineyards in the foothills of the mountains, the Sierra del Molar. The estate has made its reputation through producing wines from the Monastrell grape variety, or Mourvèdre, as the French would call it. As Mourvèdre, it's a component in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, for instance. They have 2 top single vineyard wines, which I guess they've built their reputation on because they've been very well received by the critics. Those are Las Gravas and the wine made from the old plot of pre-Phylloxera 1941, planted ungrafted Monastrell from the Pai Franco vineyard. While this is described as being Monastrell, evidently it has 15% of Grenache in the blend. Previously there had been a certain amount of Syrah as well, but that seems to have been dispensed with. The fruit is hand-picked and it's sorted, and the approach to winemaking combines the modern with the traditional. From the modern point of view, we have wines that get a cool pre-fermentation soak and a certain amount of, I believe, whole bunch or possibly whole berry fermentation, and both of these are processes that will reduce the harshness of the tannins and emphasize the freshness and the aromas of the fruit. Fermentation took place in a mixture of stainless steel fermenters and concrete tanks, and there was a brief post-fermentation maceration. I should have said fermentation all took place with the ambient yeasts that have found their way into the winery on the fruit from the vineyards. For aging, the wine is placed in a mixture of, I believe, French and American oak, but in 2 sizes. They have 5,000 litre Foudre and 500 litre demi-muid casks available for use. The wine stays in there for 9 months and then is bottled unfiltered. So let's see what we make of the wine, shall we? Start by looking at the colour. The colour has a nice depth. It's relatively dark, but I can see through it, and it's a fairly sort of vibrant red colour there. As I swirl it, it is clinging to the glass. It's not actually readily forming tears down the side of the glass there, but the wine is 14.5% alcohol and it is hanging on the sides of the glass. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? To me, that starts with a really classic Monastrell Mourvèdre aroma. It's a meaty red fruit. So starting with meat and then showing sort of aromatic, lifted red raspberry, perhaps heading onto a more sort of concentrated Loganberry sort of note. There are no real oak notes. There might be a tiny touch of perhaps peppery spice at the end of the aroma. But in general, it's a fairly rich, juicy red fruit, initially overlaid by those sort of meaty notes that mark out Mourvèdre. So let's have a taste, shall we? That's undeniably Monastrell or Mourvèdre. You've got this meatiness, you've got a spiciness. There really is quite a sort of peppery finish. And then in the midst of that, there's red fruit. It starts with the more perfumed sort of raspberry and Loganberry notes, but very rapidly heads to a much more deep, rich note, sort of like a black plum, a sort of a damson, a bullace, something like that. And then becomes licoricey, and actually the licoriciness tends to show some bitterness towards that. The wine has plentiful tannins, but they're very harmoniously knit with the concentrated fruit. They're very supple and smooth. So the first drying note you get is this sort of bitter licorice note on the back palate that then leads on to peppery spices. The alcohol at 14.5% is warm and rich, and it's adding sort of weight, and it's adding quite a high-toned, slightly alcoholic note to the back palate. The richness of the meatiness and the red fruit comes through to the finish, where it gives reasonable length to the finish. It's not particularly long, but it's a wine of good concentration. I haven't really mentioned the acidity because the acidity is nicely in there with the fruit, but the fruit is lovely and juicy, and I think that's the acidity lifting it quite nicely. It finishes quite lively, and you know, there's acidity that's actually just starting to lift some sort of red fruit perfumes out of that. So yes, that was Casa Castillo Monastrell, the 2021 vintage of that. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you find that of interest. If you do, please feel free to like and share the video. Do also think about signing up and following us on YouTube. That would be fantastic to have your support. Do leave any comments. We'd love to know what you think, whether it's about the wines we're talking about, whether it's the videos we're making, or anything else that's related to that. We'd love to hear from you. But most importantly, I do hope you'll join us for another tasting in the very near future. Bye for now.